Thanks, everybody. My name is Jacob Wasserman. I'm a research program manager at the Institute of Transportation Studies. And we look at the big questions in how people and goods get around. Some of our recent work is how transit ridership is recovering from the pandemic unevenly. We funded Lewis Center research on who among our unsheltered neighbors lives in their vehicles and where. And thinking about our late friend and colleague, Donald Shoup, evaluating new state laws that allow new developments near transit to not build on-site parking. And if any of that interests you, on May 19th, right here, I believe, we're having our downtown forum. It is about mega events and major opportunities. So not just the Olympics, but the World Cup, and the ways that this mega event can offer opportunities to rethink the way we do transportation, public works, housing, you name it, in LA. So with that, I very topically, I want to introduce Darrell Steinberg. He is the former mayor of Sacramento and past Senate President Pro Tem of the state. He was in the legislature from '98 to 2014, and he was the first Sacramentan in over 125 years to be president of the Senate. He, in 2008, became president of the Senate, and he guided the state through a $42 billion deficit and earned the JFK Profile and Courage Award. Hopefully, we won't need to draw on that experience anytime soon. But he is relevant for our work as well, been a champion of transportation and climate policy as well. Passed Senate Bill 375, the Climate and Sustainable Communities Act, and Senate Bill 743, which is about vehicle miles traveled and environmental review reform. And he secured billions for transit-oriented housing in the state. He's also led on mental health reform, crafting Proposition 63 some years ago to expand services statewide, and pioneered insurance coverage for autism treatment. So with that, can we give it up for Mayor Steinberg?
Thank you, Jacob. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I know it's Monday morning, so my job this morning is to instill a little energy and passion so that this is a very meaningful day for you. I want to begin with two thank yous. One, thank you for using a 10-year-old picture of me. And secondly, given I've been out of office now for about 3 months, thank you for not introducing me as the formerly honorable. I appreciate that as well. Thank you seriously to the Lewis Center for inviting me. Madeline, thank you for having me and extending the invitation. It is a real honor and pleasure to be here with people who practice the art of trying to perfect housing and transportation in an environment, in a society where it is often very, very difficult. And I want to talk a little bit about that this morning and leave you maybe with a couple of provocative thoughts here. The question before us, it seems to me, is, are transformational changes to housing, to transportation, and to climate, the crises of housing, transportation, and climate, are transformational changes possible? And so I reflect on a little bit on my own career, what I have seen over the course of time, and what I have had the honor of being able to participate in. I think about how in 1998, when I was a freshman member of the Assembly, and there was a vote, a very controversial vote at the time, barely 41 votes in the Assembly, with a significant majority of Democrats beyond 41 votes, to provide hospital visitation rights to domestic partners. 1998. And now, a generation later, we have marriage equality in the United States of America. And yes, marriage equality here to stay. I think about SB 375 and how for decades in this state, the idea of ceding any form of local control to regional governance was considered heresy, and in fact failed a number of times over those same decades. And in 2007, we put together what I call the coalition of the impossible: the builders, the environmentalists, the local governments, and we were able to find those key intersections of interest and move the state forward with the passage of SB 375. I think about mental health, a particular passion of mine, where for decades, the state had left an unfulfilled promise when it shut the state hospitals to build a decent system of community mental health care and fund it. And in 1998, I had the temerity to say, well, we need to change that. And even though it is not fixed, far from it, we were able to pass Proposition 63, the tax on millionaires, and now we've generated $30+ billion worth of public funding for mental health, and more people get help. And I think about my recently concluded 8 years as mayor. Similar to the city of Spokane, we were able to overcome significant opposition and end single-family zoning in the capital city of California. So if the question is making dramatic breakthroughs on our housing, transportation, and climate crisis possible? Of course it's possible, because you only need to look at the arc of history, even in these times, that crazy and unsettling times that we are living in, to know that progress is possible. Change happens when the cause, the need, and the demand is so overwhelming that those who lead have no real choice than to make the change actually happen. But this morning, I have a more sobering question about the most intractable piece of our American and California crisis. And this is the question: is safe, quality housing for everyone nearly as important to people as they and we claim it all is? Wow. Of course, you say. People decry homelessness. All the polls say housing is paramount in terms of what the public is concerned about. We gather at forums like this to expose the innovations and best practices that are out there that are actually moving us forward. And yes, in fact, we are making breakthroughs in real time, whether it's making ADUs easier to build, whether it's the controversial but very important buy right movement in the California legislature to ensure that where previously underutilized land is available for housing, like on commercial corridors, that housing can be built without too much regulation, whether it's even that part of my SB 743 that said that once a specific plan is approved and reviewed environmentally, that every project consistent with that specific plan can be approved without further review. Yes, we are making progress in the state, in Los Angeles, in every part of California. And yet, the two case studies that you will discuss today, in my view, are still exceptions rather than the rule. Los Angeles has not embraced eliminating single-family zoning. I'm not here this morning to criticize, just to make the following observation. In Los Angeles, and in most every other city in the country, the voters and those that the voters elect are saying, in many instances, that maintaining the historic nature of neighborhoods is more important than maximizing the number of additional people that could be housed with more duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. Of course, it does not have to be either or. This old stereotype that affordable housing or workforce housing is somehow lesser than single-family housing is wrong and unfair, because with appropriate design standards, ensuring architectural compatibility with the existing single-family neighborhoods, we can have both more density, more housing for people, and maintain the quality of our neighborhoods. And of course, it's more than just design, for we know what underlies a lot of the resistance to multifamily housing is that age-old stereotype that people of a different class and sometimes of a different race, that we are uncomfortable with truly integrating our neighborhoods in all the ways that make for healthier, better, and more diverse communities. And yes, I say with pride, embrace DEI, no matter what the heck's happening in this country. I say this as a matter of former political leader here. There are many things to compromise on, many things, and many lessons to learn from the last election. And yes, those of us who are on the losing side need to look inward, but never, ever, ever, ever compromise the civil and human rights of people. End of story. Portland, one of your case studies, has, by virtue of inclusionary zoning, its own production standard. When you think about it, for affordable housing, they're setting a production standard. In most parts of California, enacting inclusionary zoning is a big political fight, mainly with the developers, because they say we shouldn't have to pay for all of this. Portland's public-private approach, I think, is brilliant in its simplicity, and we can do more of the same here. But I want to get back to my central premise. Do we really care as much about the housing crisis as we say we do? Now, I'm not a big PowerPoint guy. I didn't come here with this. I'm from a different generation here, sorry. But maybe I can explain, as if I did have a PowerPoint, what I mean. Pretend you had an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper in front of you and you drew a line right down the middle of it. And on the left side, you had a heading called Obligations to Build More Housing. And on the right-hand side, you had a category that said impediments to building housing. I guarantee you that the right-hand side would be full and you might have to go to a second page. Let's think about it for a minute. Local control is important, but I've never seen it written in the Bible. Its absolute nature at times, unacceptable local control is an impediment to building more housing. Overregulation. I'm a huge supporter of the California Environmental Quality Act, and yet I say to all of you, if a project is environmentally friendly, it ought to have much less of a burden to get through the process than a project which does not help the environment, like infill housing. Cost. I was watching this, reading Ezra Klein, the podcast he did with this this new Congress member from Massachusetts, in which the guy asked the question. He goes, imagine every time you bought a new car, if the car manufacturer came to your driveway and brought the tires and brought the chassis and brought the engine and brought the frame and brought everything and manufactured it right on your driveway. It would be a hell of an expensive car. That's the way we build housing. We're in the state of the great Silicon Valley, and there are hundreds now of these manufactured housing products, and yet none of them are built to scale because they don't, quote, fit the model of tax credits and developer fees and all the other business that goes into actually constructing housing. We lack innovation, and it drives up our costs. On the left-hand side, obligations to build, I guess you can say that we have a pretty robust housing element law, which is a planning document, and it requires Herculean efforts by legal services or a assertive governor and attorney general to file a lawsuit once in a while against the worst actors, but doesn't really get at the heart of why more housing is not produced. Homelessness is similar, by the way. The famous Grants Pass case, which says that cities can clear encampments. It's not that the conclusion was all that surprising. I just think that case asked the wrong question. I have no issue with telling someone they cannot camp in an unsafe and an unhealthy way, but the question should have been, is there an obligation to provide everyone basic dignity, i.e. a roof over their head? And do they then have an obligation to accept that offer of housing? That should be the policy of the state of California and the United States of America. For you see, we fail in these conferences, and as we discuss and debate housing and beat our chests about how bad the crisis is, that housing is really an economic commodity. You can either afford it, good for you and us and me, or you're high enough up on the wait list of any given program to be able to qualify. And for the rest of the people of California, including many working people, there's nothing for them. Is housing really as important as people say it is? Think about other areas of public policy. Renewable energy, we actually mandate a renewable portfolio standard. We mandate it. And as a result, we're driven market-wise, governmental-wise, to actually meet a higher standard. Here's the most obvious one. Public education. We promise in law every young person a free public education. And what do we do instinctively without even thinking about it? We pass bonds. We build public schools, and enough public schools to make sure that there is a roof for every child to be able to learn. Now, it's not perfect, but at least it is a standard and a minimum standard. Portland and Spokane, and in some ways Sacramento, made a conscious and clear choice, even if they and we have not totally solved the problem. They actually put housing first. They not only said, yes, in my backyard, they backed it up with law and overcame those who objected. The idea of zoning has a rationale and a rational basis. It allows thoughtful planners, leaders, and residents to integrate all of the pieces that provide a high quality of life together. Housing, jobs, transportation, recreation, open space, entertainment, and so much more. But because housing is a pure economic commodity, the aspirational intent of most zoning laws are great for the people that have, but exclude too many people who have not. If we are going to have a legal right to housing, or government having a legal obligation to produce, not just plan for, but produce more housing, then zoning and state law must consciously seek to include, not exclude. If cities and counties and states do not make these conscious choices, then let's at least admit that housing and housing everyone is not nearly as important as our righteous anger makes it out to be. Clarity, moral clarity, and legal clarity, honest choices, hard decisions, which, yes, may cause temporary anger, that's more important than any single policy change. Thinking about, in conclusion, that old story of the wise old woman who seemed to have the answer to most difficult questions in life, and a group of young people wanted to challenge her and decided that they were going to prove that she didn't have the answer to everything. And so one of the young boys came to her and had a bird in his hand, you know this story, and put the bird behind his back and was going to ask, is the bird dead or alive? And if she had answered alive, he was going to then crush the bird and prove her wrong. And if she argued dead, he was going to then take his hands forward and release the bird. And the wise woman looked at him, of course, contemplated the question, is the bird dead and alive? And she said, young man, the answer is in your hands. The answer is in our hands. Go forth. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer a few questions if, hi, Hillary.
First, I want to oh, my voice does carry.
Yeah, I got a mic there. There you go.
First, I think we should have another round of applause for what you have done in legislation that is landmark and continues to make transportation better and continues to make our environment cleaner. And we want to thank you and for creating the Strategic Growth Council. It's extraordinary. I wanted to ask you about your schools and housing analogy because I really, really like it. But here's one question about the housing issue that is vexing in terms of how we start making more space and what we're doing, and that is the commodification of housing. Unlike schools, no one is buying schools and expecting them to generate an 8% return every year. But corporations are buying houses and are expecting to get back to their shareholders returns every year on those investments. And so people are renting and having their rent go up. The ability to buy a single family home is getting further and further out of reach. And the cost of housing is so different because there is so much of a competition about what's going to generate returns later and what's not. What would you say in terms of how we can affect the market so that we can no longer be subject to certain places that are supposed to generate returns versus the value of having everyone have a right to housing?
Well, my public education analogy was intended not as a comparison, but as a contrast. And I think your question illustrates the problem, because housing is purely an economic commodity with some governmental intervention. It is subject to the kind of abuse that is actually happening. And so lawmakers, I think, have an opportunity, need to rein that in. Now, they must rein that in. The commodification in that way of housing is wrong. You know, rent control, I know, is a challenging and controversial issue, but I look at what happened for how many years. No one could make a change to Costa-Hawkins. And then after, during COVID, when rent shot up, all of a sudden, including the realtors and the apartment association, said, it's time to have a real conversation about this. And so, yes, it was limited, but it moved forward the date of protection. And in municipalities throughout California, including Los Angeles, we limited rent increases, maybe not enough. And we also really put forward just cause eviction, which is one protection for people. And I think that was right. And again, it showed that you can, in fact, make a breakthrough and find the right balance. Now, I think rent control that is uncontrolled is also a problem because we're never going to change the capitalist nature of housing. I'm not foolish enough to believe that it should just become a social need, but there needs to be more balance, Hillary. There needs to be more balance. And, you know, I think this is part of the political message of the day as well. Populism, the way it's being practiced now in Washington, D.C., I don't think is not true populism. I mean, Bernie Sanders comes closer than I'm getting political here, sorry, than Donald Trump. But let me go back to my 8.511 sheet for just a minute, answering your question. If there was a legal right to housing or a legal obligation to meet a production standard, those obstacles on the right-hand side would begin to have some competition and would begin to dissipate. If the state and its municipalities knew that they needed to invest more in quality, less expensive, manufactured, off-site housing, then they would find a way to change the existing model and do so. If they knew that they needed to produce more housing, yes, they would relax some of the environmental laws around quality infill housing. But right now, I mean, to me, and I know I'm a lawyer and maybe I'm a nerd, but I really think the law matters. The law mattered. How did we desegregate the South? Through a movement, through the federal courts, and through federal statute. The law matters. And the law right now ain't on our side. What we really say with homelessness and housing is, and you know, I have my beef with the counties. I'll digress one more minute here in terms of who gets the services. Let's talk about mental health for a moment. Proud of our 31 billion, but man, the system's still broken. The systems choose who to help and who not to help. Pick any 5 people out there who are unsheltered walking the street. It's a random lottery. And some of it's based on who's the hardest to serve. If someone's really sick, they're less likely to get the help because they're more expensive. Those are choices. Those are choices, and we're making a choice. And the choice is that housing everybody, yeah, that's important. Not that important. Otherwise, that left side of the ledger would be a lot more powerful. Any more? Yes, sir.
Oh, wait, sorry, we'll go this. All right. We'll bring you back.
My name is Stuart Chesler. I'm with LA Metro Service Development. And I was wondering, how can we get different cities' building and safety departments to be more flexible with their building standards and requirements? It seems like they can often be very inflexible in how they want different things designed. And that could add substantially to the cost, and they may not be open to innovative ideas.
Well, so it's all what's in your heart and your head, right? I mean, the idea of standards to make sure that, like in Sacramento, when we did our when we eliminated single family zoning, we maintained what we call bulk control, right? To ensure that something couldn't be built in the middle of a single family neighborhood that stood out like a sore thumb visually and architecturally. I was okay with that. You know, I paused a minute, but I was okay with that. It's a balance, and our desire is and was to allow more by right duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes. And so it depends, the devil is in the detail. If the design requirements are reasonable and there is flexibility, then good. If it's intended, if the requirement is intended to discourage the developer from even trying, well, then it's not good. Some common sense.
Good morning. My name is Shine Ling. I'm a senior director at Metro's Transit Oriented Communities Group. Mayor Steinberg, I have a genuine question for you. You've been in the legislature.
As opposed to an ungenuine?
Yes. That's
there are
Yeah, people with mics have.
Go,
often,
I'm
yeah.
kidding.
You've been a legislator in the state level, and then you were in the local government. And the state has done so much years to advance all this housing legislation. And then you were in local government, having to deal with, absorb that. Can you talk about what it's been like to move from the state level to local government and what those conversations have been like among your fellow council members and mayors of like League of California Cities who sometimes seem to be resistant to all of this legislation?
So I do have the advantage of having been on both sides, but I will tell you, to go back in history, when I was in the state legislature, prior to SB 375, I authored a bill that would require regions of the state to share growth in sales tax. And as I like to say, my picture was on the post office of most suburban post offices, wanted, because I've always believed that local control is important and relevant, but way overrated. And I maintained that when I was in the legislature, and when I became mayor, I did not change my tune. I love the League of Cities, they're friends of mine now, you know, we joke about it, but I like to joke. I didn't get invited to that many conferences because I fundamentally believe that while the state should not be telling people, cities how to do something, it is absolutely right to demand that they do it. And what is the it? Produce more housing. Yes, I believe that. And so I think local control has been used, I've seen it way too many times, as an excuse to not make not just important, but vital social progress on issues which are a crisis in our society. And so people differ on that. You know, the big 13 cities are still members of the League of Cities, but we formed our own separate organization because we did not want to play the lowest common denominator game and oppose everything. We wanted more money for homeless services, for example, because we knew we needed to build. We couldn't just depend on our county's brothers and sisters. We had to build our own temporary housing and shelter and be more assertive and aggressive. And so this is a conversation which goes back and forth, but I think the pendulum has swung. And I think it should. But there's a proper balance. State, set the standards. State, set the requirements. State, make them binding requirements, which we don't do well enough. We're lousy at accountability. Locals, you comply, but do it in the way that you deem best. We can perfect that, and there's genuine accountability, then we might actually make more progress. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Good luck. Have a great conference.